Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. Well, Iraq's government has announced that paramilitary groups, such as the Popular Mobilization Forces, will need to integrate into the Iraqi army and had, of course, put forth a deadline. The PMUs, or the Popular Mobilization Units / Forces, have asked for a 2-month extension to that deadline. Now, all of this, the narrative at least for all of this, is that the United States and others have pressured Iraq into trying to distance itself from Iran. The claim is that a lot of these groups are under the influence of Iran, even though, as we know, the context here is important, that in 2014, Ayatollah Sistani, who is the most religious senior figure in that country, Iraq that is, had called for Iraqis to rise up against ISIS and to even pick up arms in that regard. These groups were then formed after his such call. So it was not an Iranian call. It's important to note that formed these groups. However, the concerns about Iran's influence in Iraq remain till today. And of course, the US and others are concerned about that, specifically, of course, within the current context of tensions in the region as well with Iran. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're joined now by Saad Al-Muttalibi, who's a member of the State of Law Alliance. He's a member of the Baghdad Security Council. He's joining us now from the Iraqi capital. We're also joined by Dr. Zana Gulmohamad, who is a teaching associate at the Politics Department at the University of Sheffield. He's joining us now from Sheffield itself. And we're also joined by Dr. Dara Salam, who is a teaching fellow in the Department of Politics and International Studies at SOAS University of London. He has written on Middle East politics as well as political theory. He's joining us now currently from Sulaymaniyah. Dara, Zana, and Saad, thank you all three for joining us. Saad, I'd like to start with you, if I may. What are your thoughts about the integration of these paramilitary groups into proper Iraqi forces?
Yes, thank you very much, and very pleased to be with you. With best regards to your other guests, we think that there are a number of views and ideas among political parties. The idea for those for the PMUs to remain independent, like the Golden Brigade, the Special Forces, which are connected directly to the Prime Minister. And the idea was that the PMUs become an independent body connected to the Prime Minister, such as closely as the Golden Brigade, the Special Forces. The idea, it's obvious from the American pressure and others, as you very clearly mentioned, the idea that to integrate the PMUs into the Iraqi army. But the problem with that, the PMUs are made of people from all walks of life. There are people who are 18 years old and people who are 75 years old. So adding those people into the Iraqi forces, the Iraqi army, which is based on a very strict regulation and army rules and a long history of the Iraqi army, would definitely create a tremendous problem in integrating those people into the Iraqi army. But nevertheless, there is a political will of the Prime Minister to integrate those with the Iraqi army, but at the same time, there are political forces, powerful political forces, that think that the Iraqi PMUs should remain independent. And it's very hard to understand that the international pressure could add to the point where the Iraqi Prime Minister would succumb to the orders from overseas.
Very well. Dara, I wanted to get your thoughts on that because, as Saad there correctly pointed out, there are challenges to just taking the PMUs as they are currently and just bringing them into the Iraqi forces. As he mentioned, of course, there's varying ages of the PMU members, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's, of course, the challenge of the PMUs essentially wanting some form of autonomy, and that has already been spoken about, I believe, in Iraq. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. There are definitely, huge challenges for this call to join or to bring the popular mobilization units into the Iraqi forces, i.e. Iraqi army. And I think actually this executive order by the current Prime Minister follows on the previous executive order by the former Prime Minister Al-Abadi, who actually about a year ago issued the same executive order in order to bring the PMU under the command of the commander-in-chief, who is basically the Prime Minister. And I think, this challenge is something which has to be faced by any Prime Minister who comes to power in Iraq. And the PMU actually is, as my learned guest also mentioned, that actually the PMU is consisted of different militias and different walks of life.
Yeah.
So basically, we know that the PMU actually is consisted of more than 60 militia groups, and the most powerful actually of these groups actually are, I would say, and according to most of the political analysis, actually are backed by Iran, or they pledge allegiance to Iran, and they have their own source of emulation, which is called al-Marja'iyah, actually goes back to the Marja'iyah of Iran, i.e. the Wilayat al-Faqih, i.e. the rule of jurisprudence. So there are huge challenges for the current Iraqi government in order to disband. But again, the point is actually whether this executive order is a call for disbandment of the popular mobilization units, or it's a restructuring of these popular mobilization units. And I think there's a difference that needs to be made actually between these two, because previously actually we were talking about the disbandment and the disarmament of these groups, but now it seems to be actually a kind of restructuring of these forces. So either they form themselves into political organizations, or they join the Iraqi army.
Okay, so on that point, if I may, I want to bring in Zana. Zana, what are your thoughts on this? Because it's interesting. Yes, the vast majority, obviously, of the PMUs would identify themselves as Shias, I would imagine. But then there are significant numbers of other minorities and other groups who are part of the PMUs as well. And in fact, the U.S. has even sanctioned Rayan al-Kildani, who is the head of the Christian Babylon Brigade. So that's odd as well, isn't it? That where the narrative is that, listen, this is all being done, because of Iranian influence, et cetera, but it's not that simple, is it?
Yes, thank you. I agree with my colleague Dara, everything he said, that many of those factions, armed factions, and militias, they have external loyalties. However, I would like to put, although the colleague Dara, he mentioned some historical context, I will add some additional information about the historical context.
Sure.
The Shia militias, including Badr Brigade, which created in the 1980s, they are one of the most powerful Shia armed forces as well as political forces in Iraq. And you have many of the Shia armed groups. They were created post 2003, and they were splintered from Jaysh al-Mahdi, such as Asa'ib Ahl al-Haq and Kata'ib Hezbollah and others. So many of them, they were created post 2003, and they were engaged in sectarian civil war, especially between 2006 and 2008. And going back to the creation of Hashd al-Sha'bi. Hashd al-Sha'bi was created by, although the majority of the Hashd al-Sha'bi, they are the most powerful pro-Iranian Shia militias. However, you have Hashd al-Sistani, who are loyal to al-Najaf, and they played a constructive role in defeating ISIS, and they presented a good picture for the militias. And you have others loyal to Muqtada Sadr, Sarai Salam. Those who are loyal to Sarai Salam, they consider themselves not pro-Iranian, although they had in the past some Iranian connections, but however they don't consider themselves as pro-Iranian. And I would like to mention about the structure of the Hajj, about the recent order. I completely agree with Dara, that this decree is not new. Haider Abadi, who also had a decree in 2018, similar decree, but it was not successful. The decree was not quite successful. And according to Iraqi constitution, Article 9, that violate any Shia any militias outside the Iraqi security forces. Therefore, their existence without a law, it is violating the Iraqi constitution according to Article 9.
Okay. So if you allow me to come in here, Zana, Saad, one of the things is that I don't want to get too caught up in just the details because, for an international audience, many of these details may not be clicking a lot, but certainly there are very complex issues at play here, aren't they? But I imagine, and I actually want to ask you, do you agree that they all do need to come, all of these militia groups, whatever you call them, paramilitary groups, etc., that they do need to come into the fold of the Iraqi army or Iraqi forces? Because I imagine that no country anywhere in the world would be okay with having independent militias within their country who sort of act independently from the forces of the country itself.
Oh, definitely. That's why there was a law, the PMU law, that was passed in the last parliament. And the law very clearly dictated the duties and the limitations of the PMUs, all of them, and didn't call them militias and called them instead the PMUs, and didn't recognize militias. And the point is, if we are to speak of all forces outside the Iraqi army, then we will also ask the dismantlement of the Peshmerga, who are a militia working in Kurdistan, belonging to two political parties. Has no authority. The Iraqi army or the Iraqi Prime Minister has no authority whatsoever on the Kurdish Peshmerga, who are definitely a political arm, a political or a militia arm of two political parties. So we can't have two ideologies conflicting. Either we run with one ideology, that we can have an independent forces connected to the Prime Minister, like the Golden Brigade, as I said, the Special Forces, who are not connected to the Ministry of Defense or the Iraqi Army, and they are independent. Therefore, the proposal that was given by a number of political parties is that the PMUs remain independent under the control, under the complete control of the Prime Minister, like the Golden Brigade. So if we talk about just the idea of militias, then there are the Kurdish militias. So they also need to be included in this. Otherwise, to have a law passing in Baghdad and other law allowing these militias in Kurdistan, I don't think there are any political parties here will accept that kind of division.
And that's a very good point. We're going to go into our first break. I'm going to say thanks Zana and Dara for their time. I'm going to ask Saad to stay with us. Viewers, we're going to be back continuing this discussion after this break. We're going to add two new voices to the conversation. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us, viewers, here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. We're still joined, of course, with Saad Al-Muttalibi, who's a member of the State of Law Alliance, who's still joining us from Baghdad. We're also now joined by Mohammed Hussein, who's Policy Director at the Iraqi Center for Policy Analysis and Research. He's joining us now from Sulaymaniyah. And joining us from Erbil is Taiyo Siraj Davis, who is an author and journalist. Taiyo, Mohammed, and Saad, thank you for staying with us and joining us. Saad, I'll start with you because I know you have to run very soon. On that point that you were making just before we went to the break, Saad, about the Kurdish Peshmerga, do you think that that will be an issue which will be addressed going forward by the government?
I don't think they have the political will or the political capability of doing that. Therefore, would be put as a condition for us if we, or the other parties, if they are to enter into negotiations on this point of disarming or including the army, the PMUs into the Iraqi army, then this should apply according to Article 9 of the Constitution. This should be applied to all militias, all forces in Iraq, which include the Peshmerga. So I think that would be that decision of first Dr. Ebadi was not implemented, and now Mr. Abdul Mahdi, again, I don't think have the political will to implement that decision. Otherwise, we will enter into an upheaval of political difficulties and differences within the Iraqi parliament.
Very well, Saad. We appreciate, of course, your time speaking as scope and, of course, for your insight. Let me go to you now, Mohammed. Mohammed, what are your thoughts about the fact that, as Saad Al-Muttalibi had put in our first segment as well on this topic, that if we are talking about all groups who are acting independent of the Iraqi army and Iraqi security forces, that we don't and we can't just talk about the PMUs, but we also need to talk about groups like the Kurdish Peshmerga and possibly even others?
Well, I don't think this is a case with the Kurdish Peshmerga forces, since Peshmerga forces are named as the KRGs and Kurdistan Regional Government is guarding forces. So they have a legal position and the legal status acceptable and mentioned in Iraqi constitution. So I don't think Iraqi federal government will have a hard time to handle anything with the Peshmerga forces as long as the political situation and the political relationship between Erbil and Baghdad would be normal and like what is going on right now. So the thing is, the issue is more related to the popular mobilization units, and the expected law would be, and the law that already the Iraqi parliament made regarding the popular mobilization units, it's just all about popular mobilization units, and the concern is also about them. I don't think Peshmerga forces is part of this ongoing discussion, since their legal status is accepted by either like Iraqi federal government and Erbil and like Kurdistan regional government, and they are part of the Iraqi security and defense forces. They are recognized as the KRG's board.
All right. Okay, and that's a fair point, Mohammed. But Siraj, I wanted to get your thoughts on that, because I imagine then the popular mobilization units can then ask the Iraqi government for more autonomy, giving the example then of the Kurdish Peshmerga, saying, listen, if they are able to practice a certain amount of autonomy themselves under the guise of the KRG, then why shouldn't the PMUs be given the same right?
Well, that's a very interesting question. When everyone says the Peshmerga, I want to make something very clear. The Peshmerga was considered a terrorist organization. Just recently, Obama placed them off the U.S. State Department Tier 3 list of designated terrorists. We did this because they were very effective in fighting Daesh. So now that we accept them as legitimate, we also have to make sure we understand there's a dichotomy. There's a dichotomy between the Peshmerga and the militias. Okay. We have the PKK, the YPG, and we have Iranian Kurdish fighters. Now, those militias, absolutely, they have to be integrated into the Peshmerga. Northern Iraq is a very volatile tinderbox. It's set to explode at any moment because we have militias all over the place. Since 1984, Turkey has been shelling northern Iraq. I almost got hit with a Turkish shell just visiting the villages of Nahla. Iran has sent drones over across the border. The Kurdish Iranian fighters have sent drones across the border to Iran. Israel is striking Baghdad with drone strikes and bombs. Turkey has, Iran has. All the countries here are violating the borders of Iraq because of these militias and bombing here and sending drones here. Absolutely. If the PMUs are required to be reined in under the Iraqi government, the Iraqi military, there has to be absolutely no question. The militias such as the PKK, YPG, and the Iranian Kurdish militias, they have to give a token of peace. They have to say, okay, fair is fair. We're going to unite under the Peshmerga because peace is the most valuable goal that we strive to aspire to attain.
Mohammed, what are your thoughts on that? Because, again, certainly this is a very complex situation, and I imagine that convincing any group to give up their arms and or to integrate into what are accepted forces within the country is a very tough process. I mean, even with the PMUs, one of their spokespersons has said that they need 2 months of an extension right now to be able to integrate. And I imagine that, again, this argument for a certain amount of autonomy will remain.
2 points. First of all, I wanted to comment on what Siraj said. I think PKK forces and Iranian Peshmerga forces, they are not Iraqi citizens, and their cause is not in Iraq. They are fighting Turkish government and Iranian government, and they have their own cause, and it's a different story. In Iraqi Kurdistan, we have only Peshmerga forces, and they are recognized, and even they are mentioned in the Iraqi budget law, and based on the Iraqi budget law, the federal government should fund them. So there is no issue with the Kurdish forces. So the problem is only with the popular mobilization units. And that's true. These units need sometimes to reorganize themselves and to be incorporated within Iraqi security forces. And I think all sides and all parties in Iraq are on the same page, and they agree that they need some time and they need some legal frame to get incorporated. Yeah. And we already have a law to incorporate all those forces within Iraqi army and security forces. The problem is just there are very few armed groups, especially the groups that are backed by Iranians. They are not happy with the law, and they are not happy with being totally under the command of Iraqi leaders, Iraqi governments. Yeah. So I think with time and with some wise discussions, Prime Minister Adel Abdulmahdi will be able to persuade those leaders and those Iranian-backed armed groups to work and within the Iraqi security institutions.
Okay, just because we're running out of time, so if I may, Mohammed, I apologize because we're running out of time. I wanted to give Siraj the final word. Siraj, the concern when we're talking about all of the above, really, is, and again, the narrative is this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the concern is that Iraq does not want to become the venue or setting of further tensions between the United States and Iran. And several Iraqi officials have said they simply do not want to be a part of any of the above, simply because their country is just recovering from a very many years of war. Is that a fair point? Is that a fair concern? And do you think that's what's behind all of this at this time?
I think that, first of all, my country, the United States, asking Iran to combine all the PMUs into an Iraqi military is unfair. Considering the Kurdish opposition, the Kurdistan should also do the same. However, I do agree that there are 30 PMUs. That's a lot more than different militias because you only have the PKK, YPG, and Iranian Kurdish militia, whereas the PMUs have over 30 different militias. But both sides, for the interest of peace, and that's the majority of Iraqis here, we just want a normal life. We don't care about your religion. We don't care about your politics. We don't care about your business. Give us a normal, decent life, please. And we want the militias to be reined in on both sides. Be fair. That's politics. Anybody understands politics, diplomacy like me as a former political lobbyist, it's give and take. Get the Kurdish militias under control, the PMUs under control, but both have to work together. And if the the Kurdistan region is not working with the Baghdad government, there's no use in getting any militias under control. I'm speaking as a human. I'm not ignoring facts from the other sides. Yeah. If the conflict progresses here, the majority of the victims will be humans. They will be the non-combatants, innocent people. Both Kurdistan and Baghdad to work together to bring in the militias. Done. Let's have some peace here instead of the decades of violence we've had.
All right, and that's a very good point to conclude on. We, of course, appreciate both of your time and, of course, your insight and analysis. That was Taiyo Siraj Davis speaking to us from Erbil, and we were also joined by Mohammed Hussein, who was speaking to us from Sulaymaniyah. And, of course, we had our other guests, Saad, Zana, and Dara, also speaking to us in our first segment and second for a bit, respectively. Viewers, as all of our guests have spoke about, there are a lot of complex issues when it comes to these different groups which were formed, all of them seemingly, of course, to try to defeat ISIS, and some for other reasons since 2003 beyond. It is complex, as I said, to try to rein in all of the above, but as Siraj there said, it needs to be fair. The Kurdish issue is also very important, with the different Kurdish forces working not in tandem and against each other really at times. All of those need to be reined in as well. Of course, the PMUs have said that they need an extension for 2 months at this time. Is the Iranian influence overstated, or is it possibly even understated? Is and should these groups be coming under Iraqi government control? Logically, one would say yes, because no country really would want any independent forces working against or independently of their country's forces. We'll keep a close eye on how all of that develops, of course, in Iraq. I'll be back, though, after this break with our next segment. Welcome back, viewers. We're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. Well, a recording of Ronald Reagan, who was then the governor of California, has come out, in which Ronald Reagan, when speaking to then President Richard Nixon, refers to African delegates at the United Nations as monkeys and says that they were still uncomfortable wearing shoes. And those are exact quotes from even the soundbite that we will play in just a few moments. Now, all of this is important not just, of course, for Ronald Reagan's own legacy and reputation and how he's spoken about in contemporary U.S., but obviously it's also about Donald Trump and the racism that we're currently seeing play out across the United States, in many places, of course, and the way that Donald Trump has spoken about Mexicans, for example, as rapists, or his quote-unquote Muslim ban, or many other such issues. There's a lot, obviously, to talk about, but I want to play, in fact, that soundbite. And, of course, many people have probably already listened to this, but for those viewers who have not, this is an important thing to listen to.
Last night, I tell you, to watch that thing on television, as I did, yeah, to see those monkeys from those African countries, damn them, they're still uncomfortable wearing shoes.
All right, our guests joining us to discuss this further are Binna Kandola, who is a professor. He specializes in diversity and the ways in which biases, conscious and unconscious, affect decision-making and behavior in organizations. His recent book is called Racism at Work, The Danger of Indifference. He's joining us now from Oxford. We're also joined by Robert Bridge, who's a political analyst and the author of the book Midnight in the American Empire, which had been released in 2013. He's joining us now from Moscow. Robert and Binna, thank you both for joining us. Binna, I wanted to start with you, and I want to get your reaction, of course, and your thoughts about that recording of Reagan. Certainly not a surprise for many of those of us who have looked into racism and the history of it, but what do you think its effects will be?
Its effects, there kind of two sets of effects, I think. One is that people will be shocked, which they should be. And secondly, I think that it will reinforce the view for a lot of people is that racist people say those sorts of things. And as I would never say those sorts of things, I could never be a racist. And in fact, what we know from the research is that type of racism, psychologists refer to what we've just heard as old-fashioned racism, that we actually do know that racism has, like a virus, mutated. And that modern racism is a problem, but it's far more subtle than that. And because many of us would never use that sort of language, we think that we could never be racist, and that's just not the case.
You know, Robert, Trump likes to say that he's the racist person that anyone would ever know, but I imagine Reagan would probably have argued the same thing, wouldn't he have?
Perhaps he would have. It's undoubtable that he would have. But I think the important thing to remember here, though, is the current situation in the United States right now and the political battle that's being waged between the Republicans and the Democrats. I mean, of course, Reagan's comments are deplorable and very regrettable, of course, and they may damage his legacy as the president. But at the same time, you have this battle going on between the Democrats and the Republicans, and they're trying to make Donald Trump appear as a racist. And I'm no fan of Donald Trump for sure, but I think those claims are being driven by political agendas where they're trying to make the guy look like a racist, where in fact he's trying to show his opinion on particular issues. For example, the wall, the Mexican the wall that hasn't been built yet, and the border situation with Mexico. That's a very serious problem. And whenever they try to bring up this issue with the Democrats shoot back. and call him a racist. And of course, some of his comments have been borderline racist. I would agree. But at the same time, there are issues in the United States that are being ignored simply because people throw out this term racism, racist, he's a racist. And that basically destroys the conversation right there. It shuts down the conversation. Just like if you call somebody, I don't know, a conspiracy theorist, for example, or an anti-Semite. You've shut down the conversation completely. You've made the other person look terrible, and therefore the end of the conversation. And the problem continues.
That's an interesting take, Binna. I wonder what's on that because, there is that criticism that the PC brigade, as they're called, the brigade that, that likes to have everyone just rein within this box and not really air necessarily what may be their honest opinions, is a bit too harsh sometimes. Do you think that Donald Trump is actually, as some people would claim, a breath of fresh air, where he is politically incorrect and will say things which obviously are on the face of them racist, but he's talking about important issues such as illegal immigration, for example, in the US or otherwise?
I think it's a good point, actually, that the reason why he's seen as a breath of fresh air is because conversations like this have been shut down in the past. And we think that if we prevent people having a debate about these things, we are, in fact, then that's getting rid of prejudice and racism. In fact, what the research shows is not having conversations like this may, in fact, make our prejudices worse. And so the reason he could be described as a breath of fresh air is that people are saying, I haven't been allowed to talk about these things in the past. Now, the conversations themselves and the debates are important and they're difficult. But actually not having them doesn't make the issues go away. So at some point, we do have to engage in these emotional, fractious, the difficult conversations if we're going to progress.
Okay, so Robert, I want thoughts are on if we need to progress on this issue of racism. I imagine Trump's strategy is not a very good one, is it? Because again, on the face of it, if he's so politically incorrect, and we can look at survey upon survey, Robert, about the partisan divide now within the United States, not mind you just because of Trump. This partisan divide began really under Obama himself. Do you think that that's healthy, though, for any conversation on important issues? Because, there is growing Islamophobia. That's a reality, right? But then at the same time, it's not really addressed. Is the way to go about talking about illegal immigration, terrorism, whatever the issue may be, to call out other groups and to just label them?
With regards to Islamophobia, yeah, I think that is definitely, ever since 9/11, that's been a serious issue, and I think it's been blown completely out of boundaries. It's regrettable. With regards to the other side of racism, though, with the current discussion going on, like for example with Baltimore, Trump, he understands. I mean, we can't deny it. He's been successful. He's in the White House. So people can talk about his methods and whether or not it's correct, but the reality is it gets people talking, and that's really the main thing here. With regards to his comments about Baltimore, yes, they were regrettable. I mean, nobody wants to be told that they live in a rat-infested, uninhabitable place, which is what he did. He offended many people, but at the same time, he got the conversation going. And there's a debate right now in Baltimore, well, not just in Baltimore, but across the country. Where is all this money going that was sent to Baltimore to help this city? And let's not forget, Baltimore, they have only 600,000 people in this city. Okay, they have more murders, a lot of them by handguns, than the city of New York, which has 12 times more people. So we're talking about a city that's basically a war zone. Kids can't walk the streets without parents, and even if they have their parents with them, it's extremely risky. So Trump, yeah, his remarks are, you could call them regrettable. Personally, I don't think they were racist. They were very, very edgy. But what it did, it's got people talking, and I think that's really the important thing here, just to start a conversation. And it's really working for Trump. People are not visiting Baltimore. They've got reporters going there. They're talking to the residents who live in Baltimore. A lot of them Of course, they could be cherry picking who they're talking to.
Yeah.
But for the most part, they're saying, yeah, hey, it's good that somebody's finally talking about this. We have serious problems here. And now, and for example, Elijah Cummins, the Baltimore legislative congressional leader of this city, he's even come out in the past saying bad things about the place, that it's drug infested. But when Trump says it, suddenly it's a bad thing.
Well, I mean, Binna, as somebody who's been to Baltimore a number of times myself, I had family that lived there for a while, and obviously it's not lost upon me that I may have just visited a bubble within Baltimore, which was nice. But I imagine, Binna, that it goes back to sometimes federal government policies, doesn't it, in the United States or even elsewhere in the world, really, when you have a city within a country which does have all of the above issues. Many people would then point to previous governments and previous presidents, and the thoughts of Reagans and Nixons and others about how they dealt with those cities and the fact that they may have African American majorities or significant numbers of African Americans living there. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think that governments have in the past genuinely laid out policies which are racist in nature?
I think that's almost certainly true. I think that you can talk about Reagan, you can talk about Nixon. I think it's also important to look at the Democrats as well. I think one of the dangers of the left versus the right, for example, liberals versus the conservatives, is that the liberals point the finger at the conservatives and say, you are racist. And what that prevents them doing is holding the mirror up to themselves and kind of saying, actually, you know what, our attitudes aren't too great either. And in fact, you will find people, I mean, you mentioned about Islamophobia earlier. You compare the kind of comments that people will make today compared to those that you played earlier with Reagan. Yeah. There's clearly a racial hierarchy at play there. Now, people would never say today that people coming from the Indian subcontinent are inferior, because they would never say that openly, in the way because they know that they'd be condemned for saying it. But since 9/11, it's very commonly heard that the issue with people who are Muslim is that they hold different values. So it's no longer about inherent capabilities, but actually a set of beliefs and inherent kind of views of other people, which are the problem. So the conversation, the way we describe it is different, but the implications are exactly the same.
Very well. We're going to leave that as our point. The clock has gotten the best of us, but I appreciate both Binna and Robert for their time and, of course, for their insight today. Binna was speaking to us from Oxford and Robert was speaking to us from Moscow. Now, viewers, this is an important topic because, Reagan is well respected and has been well respected by both sides, by Democrats and Republicans, for a very long time. The facade has now seemingly shattered with this new recording that has come out. It had not been previously released because there was an effort to try to respect Reagan while he was still alive. But now that he has passed on, the truth about his racist views is now coming out. Nixon's racist views are, of course, well known. Donald Trump's racist views are well known as well. Is he simply just being politically incorrect about important issues? Is this the way to really go about these sorts of things? Offending whole groups of people, generalizations about Africans or others. Is that the way to go about to deal with any tough issue in any country? I would think not, but as Robert there said, there would, of course, be a very large population within the U.S. and other countries that would think, hey, let's talk about these things openly. We're going to keep a very close eye on that here in Scope, and we'll see what the ramifications of Reagan's recordings and audio will be in the days and months to come. We'll leave it there for now, though. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.